right, welcome everyone to Bible class this morning here at Holy Cross. We've been sort of standing here. I've been waiting. There's a red light up on the balcony that generally comes on when tells us everything is go. We're on the air and everything is ready. And Chris just told me as he's finishing up playing that the red light's broken. So it's good he said something, because we could have just stood here for the next 50 minutes and listened to the piano, waiting for the red light. At any rate, welcome to Bible class this morning. It's good to have everybody here. If you're out in the parlor and getting that cup of coffee and beginning to make your way into the church, that's time to do that as we get ready to dig into a little bit more of the story of the Exodus. We're at the Red Sea. The picture that's been on our screen at the start of all of our classes is the story we're actually talking about today, the drowning of Pharaoh and his horses, and the deliverance of God's people as they journey safely through the waters. Now, if you're here in the building, there's a table partway back that has the lesson sheets on it, and invite you to take a copy of that so you've got one. It's the same sheet as we used last week. If you're watching online, whether that's right now at 5 to 10 on a Sunday morning here in Kitchener, or a little later in the week, you can always go to the church website and you can download the lesson notes. These are, again, the same ones as last week. And for those who are watching on the live stream or tuning in a little bit later, questions are always welcome at my email address, and that is there on the screen for you. All right, later today, it's funny how time and experience and whatnot all else changes you. 20 years ago, I'd have been excited about what I have to do later today and eager to be part of the discussions and ready to go, chomping at the bit. But I have to go to Mississauga for the next couple of days for a bunch of meetings, and quite frankly, I'm almost dreading it, just because I got to go to a meeting, and this is going to be sitting, and it's going to be long, and it's going to be tedious in places, and I'm just feeling very sorry for myself. But I got word last night a little about where we're staying, and I just felt better about it right away. I felt better immediately when I found out they had a gravy hot tub. I just felt all better about everything. You know, I'm not much into. I don't care about the 32-inch HD TV. I got that at home, but I do not have a gravy hot tub. So that might be worth the trip right there. Anyway, all right. This next couple of slides, the two go together here. Kind of fit into the dad joke category, but I thought this was a little bit better than some dad jokes, if for no other reason than the graphic that goes with it. Here we have. I was walking down the road this morning and got hit by a violin, a clarinet, and then a piano. Oh. But the graphic just made it for me when I saw that. I thought that's better than average, that's for sure. Anyway, all right. And some of you know my deep love for the vegetable family. I have been eating them, even though Susan's away, be assured of that. But I discovered a new definition of one of my personal favorite vegetables. For the longest time, I actually only thought celery had been invented to convey Cheez Whiz. If you remember the old snack where you put celery inside, or Cheez Whiz inside the celery, and then you took your finger and you licked out the Cheez Whiz and then threw the celery away. It was somewhat, to my shock, you could actually bite into it, and well, celery does. It's a little bit like water with hair in it, you know. But anyway, all right. welcome a few more people joining us here in the church this morning, and lesson notes and everything else are online, and questions can be fired to my email address. And we are going to talk about the Red Sea, but I will just, I said a few moments ago in a kind of joking, feeling sorry for myself sort of way, about heading off to Mississauga later today and spending Monday and Tuesday there in meetings. We have been talking a little bit here about interchurch relations and relationships with other Christians, and this is one of these very practical spots on the journey. The meetings that I'll be involved with over the next couple of days are with our parent church, our mother church, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. When Lutheran Church Canada was formed way back in 1988, which seems like yesterday and a long time ago all at the same time, there were a number, we were all part of that church body, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. But there were a number of congregations, particularly here in southwestern Ontario, that didn't feel they were quite ready to join Lutheran Church Canada. And reasons varied, and we're not interested too much anymore in those reasons. And agreements were made between the two churches and things like that, and time has gone on. And it's kind of a situation a little bit like what happened in the book of Exodus, the very beginning, where if you remember the story of God's people before, Joseph had gone down to Egypt and had risen to great power in Egypt and had been one of the leaders of the country. And then at the beginning of Exodus, the little announcement that new pharaohs had come up that didn't understand, and the Israelites had become slaves. That's not exactly what's happened in the relationship between these two church bodies, but new pharaohs, new leaders have come, and time has changed. And what was at one time a very harmonious relationship has become somewhat more stressed over different things that have happened in the last 30 years or so, things that each and every one of them in and of themselves, not particularly a big thing, but when you bring them all together kind of cumulatively starts to become an irritant. And so what has been decided, and what I'll be taking part in for the next couple of days, is an event in Mississauga where we're going to bring together pastors from our church body, Lutheran Church Canada, and from the American church body, Lutheran Church Missouri Synod congregations here in Canada, and have a good faith attempt to talk honestly about some of the struggles that have happened and to sort of plot a better way forward for the future. So this is a real live example of us, wanting and needing a very deep fellowship with another body, one that we are already in fellowship with, but one that we need to, relationship that needs to be maintained, kind of like any other human relationship. So that's the exercise that we'll be involved in. And for those of you who just came in and didn't get to see the very first slide, I'm sure most of it will be solved in the gravy hot tub. I'm not sure the waffles, eggs, and biscuits will help, but a gravy hot tub, you can't go wrong. All right. Okay, so that's a little bit of that. So if you have an extra spot in your prayers to keep that meeting, you don't need to, God knows the meeting and all of that that's going on, that people speak truth, they speak in love, and we work together to resolve the little things that have accumulated over time and get this back onto a better footing again. All right, now into Exodus. We're in Exodus chapter 14. And if you're here in the church and want to grab a pew Bible out, that's probably not a bad idea, unless, of course, you have the whole chapter committed to memory, and you don't need that, but not too many of us have that. The people of Israel, as we've seen over the past little while, they've been set free. They have begun their Exodus journey. And just to kind of recap a little of what we talked about last time, we see here a bit of a shift in terms of where God is putting the emphasis in terms of his own activity with his people. In the first 12 and a half chapters, right up to the final plague and the death of the firstborn, God has been there to be the Savior of His people, coming to them in their distress. And we looked at this passage in a little more detail last time, but the key message is right here at the very end. He came down to deliver them from the hands of the Egyptians. God rolled up His sleeves. God went to battle against the gods of Egypt and against Pharaoh, and now God has delivered the people out of the land, which then brings a new emphasis in terms of God's work with His people that comes from the very end of chapter 13. He now becomes the companion. He's still going to fight battles for them. There are still battles to be fought. There are still challenges to be overcome. But now He is going to be the companion God who walks with His people every step of the way. The pillar of cloud to lead them along the way in the daytime, in the night, a pillar of fire. And the upshot of it all is that He will not depart from before the people. He will journey with them. And I'll talk about that again just in a few minutes, because they are going to need His journeying with them, and they're ultimately also going to need His hand to win the battles, because as we discussed last time, they're cornered. Pharaoh is like the roaring lion, looking for someone to devour, to borrow Peter's analogy from the New Testament for the evil one. And Pharaoh he has a change of heart. He wants to bring the people back again and enslave them again. He's realized, that this is causing his own country great hardship to lose all the, big chunk of the workforce, and he wants them back. And so he comes after them and threatens to kill them. And as we said last time, the thing that makes Pharaoh so terribly fearsome in the eyes of the people of Israel is that he possesses, what was in those days the equivalent of nuclear weapons. He has the chariot. And the Israelites don't have chariots, and they're largely on foot. And you don't have to know a whole lot about the tactics of warfare to know that if you're on foot and you're being pursued by someone with chariots, you haven't got a whole lot of hope, especially in the numbers that Pharaoh had. He had a vast army, and he was ready to use that army against the people of Israel. Now, last time, too, we talked a little bit about their early journey. We saw last time that they left this area here, which is just generally called the land of Goshen, in the northeast corner of Egypt, where they had lived and worked just to the east of the Nile Delta. And they had journeyed southward in a southeastern direction. And the events of what we call the Red Sea probably happened somewhere in around this area that I was just coloring there. The people have camped, and God has kind of given them a very strange direction to sort of camp, facing back towards Egypt again. Their backs are to the sea. And I used the expression last time. They're kind of stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea, so to speak. And Pharaoh sees that. He realizes that from a strategic perspective, he has the upper hand, and so he journeys out to make war against the people of Israel. A key thing that is going to emerge also in this discussion, and we just got to this at the end of the session last time, is if God is the companion, the people are the pilgrims. And and they're going to struggle with the role of being the pilgrim. The pilgrim that relies on God to give them the things they need when they need them, in the amounts that they need, and all of that sort of thing. When the people of Israel see Pharaoh coming up behind them, their first response, quite honestly, is going to be panic. And they're going to cry out to Moses. They do. It's actually kind of comic in what the way they put it. Were there not enough graves down in Egypt that you brought us out here? The cemeteries are getting full down there, so let's bring the people out here and we'll kill them here, and they can just be buried here in the wilderness. And Moses responds to them and says, no, folks, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you only have to be silent. And we talked last time about how those same promises are made to you and to me today. Their freedom from Egypt was entirely God's work. Also, their safety in the journey to their new home was entirely in God's hands. They were pilgrims and spectators to God's activity. And as I prepared this material, I was reminded that a number of years ago, somewhere around 2008, 2007, somewhere in there, I was asked, I was still living out west then, to give a paper at the pastors' conference for the church workers in the western region of our church. And the assignment was rather large, one of these cumbersome assignments that's sort of hard to get your mind around. And it was something about living as strangers in a strange land, and adapting as Christians from being the kind of majority culture, which many of us grew up in, and where most people, or a good chunk of the population, went to church, were involved in the activities of the church, and had a basic understanding of the fundamentals of Christianity, at least, even if they weren't maybe actively practicing that. And I was asked to give a paper on how does the church respond to that. Well, like, if I had the answer to that, I'd be doing it. But how we respond to the change, where we're no longer in the majority position, where basic biblical literacy among the population is a thing of the distant past, it seems like, and where people more and more are actually even hostile to Christianity. And in the preparation for that paper, I read a book that has influenced my thinking a great deal. Kind of just off the top of my head remember the title, but I have it upstairs in my library. And it wasn't by a Lutheran, but it was a very thoughtful analysis of the world in which Christians live today. And he made the point, and if I recall correctly, did so on the basis of some of the Exodus story, that we are a pilgrim people. He says the church has sort of struggled between two, not necessarily opposites, but two very different approaches to things. On one hand, the church is the crusader, going forth into new lands, planting missions in the gospel, and going forth and spreading the good news. And there was a time for that, was his point. But his argument was that the day of the crusader is kind of past. Not that we aren't vigilant and continuing mission and continuing to reach out. That's all very much part of the church's work. But the posture from which we do it is no longer as the crusader, but as the pilgrim, as one who comes. We're in a journey. We don't, in and of ourselves, hold the power cards as much as we used to. And so we come alongside other people, we work with other people. Meeting human need becomes a much more important part of mission. Understanding the culture into which we're proclaiming the gospel becomes a much more important part of mission. And we are people, somewhat like the children of Israel here wandering in the wilderness. Much more having to rely on God to lead us, and which is the way we should be all the time. But sometimes when you're in the position of greater power, you can think this. You feel a little bit more self-reliant, and trusting God to open the doors, to lead the way, and to be our companion along the way in the journey. And that was, in the end, the point. I read this and I went, I think you're really on to something here. I think, our real place in this new world as strangers in this strange land that we find ourselves in is much more that of the pilgrim church, and like the children of Israel, trusting God to walk with us step by step along the way. Anyway, any comments, questions, observations? Oh, a few hands coming up right away. Okay, we'll start on the right with Chris.
Oh, well, so the NIV, which is in the pews, has be still. You need only to be still, which reminded me of be still and know that I am God, as opposed to our frantically running around thinking we've taken control of the situation.
Yeah, for sure. Be still. That's from the NIV and the ESV differ a little bit, but ESV puts the emphasis on standing firm. But as you correctly point out, in the NIV, which is the Pew Bible, it's be still. Yeah, absolutely. And Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. It's not our running around frantically. Yes, Tim, you were.
And hardly is hard to go and continue doing his works. And this whole thing about being stuck next to the Red Sea was another one of those, you're just my puppet to go and show my glory, to use to show my glory. And so I would say that Pharaoh may have thought he was doing this.
Yes.
But it was all God saying, no. He basically, it's like, you will do what I command.
Yeah, no, yeah. Tim is making the point, for those that maybe couldn't pick it up, that all of this is happening, very much, in line with God's direct will for what He wants to have happen for His people. Absolutely, and Pharaoh, is kind of is in his own way the instrument of God. Yeah, and we see this later in the Old Testament too, with some of the other rulers that emerge in the other nations. They actually unwittingly, unknowingly, are instruments of God in their decisions that they make, both for the good of the people and also sometimes for bringing difficulty into the people of Israel's lives. Melanie, did I see your hand? Or was it in that?
Like Chrissy, having a verse that comes into focus, I just thought of Corinthians, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made known in your weakness. And
yes.
So what God is doing is so important for our maturation as people of faith, to go back to a pilgrim's posture rather than a power posture, because I think what's happened in Christian communities where there has also been a concurrent walk through power and majority, is we start to move ever more into that self-reliance, and we've clearly done something really good, and that's why we're here.
Yes.
And we become really distracted from His grace being made known in our weakness.
Right.
And it's such an important part that we have to embrace, because that's not the Christian church globally. And we have Christian communities now that we are coming into contact with, and our Sudanese friends included, where living in a world where you're not the majority, politically, socioeconomically, has shaped the expression and the practice of their faith and their walk with Christ in really different ways from us, who sometimes have maybe atrophied or become apathetic in the blessing and the grace.
Mm-hmm.
because we have been here in such prosperous conditions, and we start to get into that self-reliant posture. So it's such a blessing to us as communities to actually become a minority, because Christ becomes bigger again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is, as much as we might look back and go, oh, for the day when, everybody went to church and everybody did everything, that way. There is a little bit of blessing in the sense that we come back into a little more alignment with the world of the Bible's times, where Christians were never the majority, always the minority, and having to live under those conditions, where, as you correctly point out, you become much more reliant upon God to guide you through this, and you don't fall under the misconception that this is all your great, this is because we had a great meeting in Mississauga and solved all the church's problems, and now we can emerge out of this triumphant and victorious and win the world to the gospel sort of thing. I was going to say win the world to Lutheran Church Canada or something like that, but be cheeky here, but anyway. Okay, Gord, I see a hand. I think I've just done what my goal is here, say something somewhat, anyway, and just shut up and let you talk. Go ahead, Gord.
On that note, when you think in this day and age of the black history of colonization, it is going to become more and more difficult for the church to be able to justify in the minds of people outside of the church our mission to go into all the world and preach the gospel, or to evangelize, in our own area. Why should we become like you? Why can't we just be like ourselves?
Yep. Yeah, no, exactly. The whole, and in some church bodies, I'll be blunt and honest here, they've more or less, given up the missionary task. If you describe missionary task as the proclamation of the gospel, the missionary task has largely become caring for human need. Not that that's not important, and not that God doesn't get things done through that. I mean, but yeah, it is something we need to be even more cautious about. And, for myself, one of the things I've always appreciated about how our church body has conducted mission is that, basically we have always used, or the more the pilgrim model. Our church does not send anyone into a community unless there's an invitation to the community. And even when we go, as we have with Holy Cross here, to First Nations communities out on Vancouver Island, we're not going in there as here we are, bang the drums. We've scheduled ourselves in. We always, it's integral, essential to those trips, that there be an invitation extended from the people themselves. Yes, we would like you to come. Yes, you have our permission to come. This is what we understand you're coming to do. So that we're to, other groups don't operate that way. But I think it's a far more respectful way, far more consistent with the pilgrim idea that okay, we go to you and we say we'd like to come, but it's really your call whether we come into your community. And the Lord does open doors in that way. Absolutely, He does. And probably the door is opened a little wider because we've all made thought about this together. Yeah. Chris, I saw your hand up. Yeah.
Different question, but looking at your map, clearly they didn't take what would appear to be the most direct route.
No.
Where in this was Moses told he would never see the promised land?
Can't remember off the top of my head. Not yet. We haven't got there yet. No, it comes a little later. He gets to Sinai first, and then that's where. Anyway, we'll get there. Yeah. Okay. Well, or maybe not. I don't know. The rate we're going. All right. I am going to now do this. Please record this for all time and posterity. I remembered today, without being prompted, to pass around the attendance sheets. I won't even be here tomorrow to get the gold star from the staff for remembering this, but I remembered. All right. Any further questions on this? This is general concept of pilgrims and things like that. All right. Melanie, you alluded to a Bible passage from 2 Corinthians there, my grace is sufficient for you. A couple of other Bible passages that also speak to me about God's sufficiency, God's care for his people, and our need to rely upon that. One passage that came to mind was John chapter 10, when Jesus' discussion about being the good shepherd. My sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand. I and the Father are one. So we're the flock. We're the pilgrims. But the shepherd has us in control, and the Father, who is greater than all, is also holding us in his care. And then from the book of Revelation, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Just again, that the victory has been won for us completely. All right, let's launch and move a little bit further ahead here now. And if you have your Bible handy, we're going to, we've got the people backed up against the sea. Pharaoh and his army, you can hear the horses and the chariots coming. And Moses is wondering a little bit about what is going to happen. And the Lord speaks to Moses. We'll pick this up at Exodus chapter 14, verse 15, where the Lord gives us a foretaste of what is to come. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on." So turn around and go forward. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea, to divide the waters so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so they will go in after them. And I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. The Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. So they've been told what's going to happen. And then, verse 19, the angel of the Lord, of God rather, who had been traveling in front of Israel's army, withdrew and went behind them. The pillar of cloud also moved from in front and stood behind them, and coming between the armies of Egypt and Israel. Throughout the night, the cloud brought darkness to the one side and light to the other, so that neither went near the other all night long. So God, the pillar and the angel move, to the rear of the people. God thereby prevents the Egyptians, who have all the power and all the horsemen and all the energy, prevents them from overcoming the Israelites in the night. Which would have probably been the ideal time for there to have been a battle or a conflict between them, so that they'd be caught in the darkness. But God works miraculously to put a buffer there in place between the two groups of people. Then, moving along, verses 21 and 22. Moses then stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind and turned it into dry land. The waters were divided, and the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground, with a wall of water on their right and on their left. This is the big event. The wind blows and causes this to happen. God uses a natural phenomenon, the blowing of the wind, to bring about this parting of the waters. We said last time, I think, thanks to the movie, we anticipate this as being, walls of water maybe as high as the church. Maybe they were, maybe not. Doesn't really matter. You don't need 60 feet deep water to wash away an army. You can do it in a lot less if you're God. And at any rate, the sea is divided, and the people are given the clear path to walk through the water on dry ground. And then, just as was predicted, the Israelites pursued them. This is verse 23 to 25. The Egyptians, I said the Israelites pursued them, the Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen followed them into the sea. In the morning watch, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. He made the wheels of their chariots swerve, so they had difficulty driving. We know something about that this past week here in Kitchener after the freezing rain, right? Your cars here swerving down the little yellow light that tells you you're swerving. At least in one of my cars, we have that. You're bringing. Okay, good. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, you can. I'll nominate you. Yes, for made the wheels of the chariot swerve. They had difficulty driving. The Egyptians said, "Run away, run away," to quote Monty Python. Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. They realize once they get out there into the midst of things that this is not exactly the best place to be. They're not making progress. Even if the Israelites kind of walk through on dry ground, the chariots, the horses, there's a lot of weight there, and they're going to sink in. Sort of like I was this week, somewhat envious of the dog. We went out to shovel snow on Thursday morning after the freezing rain, and the dog just happily ran along the top of the snow. She did not have sufficient weight to puncture little holes in the snow and make her travel difficult. I, on the other hand, was falling, going through, and it was like, she's running around the front lawn while I'm trying to clean this up, and she's just having the blast out there because she was actually skating a little bit, sliding, and she was having some fun with that, and I'm like, this is not fun, Anyway, same sort of phenomenon here. All right. Then, verse 26. The Lord speaks a second time to Moses. Stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and their horsemen. So once again, Moses stretches out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and the horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived. And then, just to finish this through, but the Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. That day the Lord saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians lying dead on the shore. And when the Israelites saw the great power of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in his servant Moses. So the whole thing is told rather economically, as is typical in Exodus. There's no undue dwelling on the gore. It's just told in a very straightforward fashion. The waters were divided. The Israelites went through. The Egyptians followed. The waters come back, and the Egyptians are wiped out. Any questions just about the actual event of the crossing of the Red Sea? Chris, yeah?
It says at least 3 times on dry ground. So you can picture mud and stones and all the stuff that would be at the edge of a water, you know, the bottom of a body of water. But not only were the walls up, the ground was dry for presumably the children, the cattle, the older folks to walk through without difficulty.
Yeah, yeah. We talked last time. One of the possibilities, in terms of locating this, in where did this really happen? There are a couple of places along the way there between what are the Bitter Lakes and the Red Sea. There's water that flows all through there, or did at that time. It's all now become the Suez Canal. But there were some kind of almost land bridges between the deeper bodies, the really deep bodies of water. So there would have been, a place where you could walk through. Maybe the only thing that I've sort of seen in my life that would be anywhere kind of analogous to that is. If you go to St. Andrews, New Brunswick someday, which is a lovely little touristy town in New Brunswick, you can go across to something called Minister's Island, which was the summer home of one of the great railway barons, the guy that was in charge of the CP, Sanford Fleming. And this was his place. And anyway, you can get across when the tide is out. I mean, this is a natural phenomenon. When the tide is out, there's a big sandbar that emerges. And you can actually drive across on the ocean floor. Then you have to get home again before the tide comes in, or you'll be spending the night in your car on the island. And, the ground is dry, but and it's solid enough that it can support cars going through. Anyway, the reason they call it Minister's Island is that the Anglican pastor of this little St. Andrews town lived on that island. And I thought to myself, what an most of us are introverts anyway, and he lived there more or less by himself. And I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. And on those Sundays when the tide was in, gosh, sorry folks, won't swim real well. Bit far to canoe. Be a lay service Sunday. Oh, fine. I'll just be over here on my little island all by myself. I said to Susan, I get this guy. I get him. Not that I would do it, but I don't think it's the best way to do ministry. But anyway, all right. Any other questions just about the event? All right. Let's talk then a little bit about our own Red Sea experience. And if the Passover was very much focused on, and our discussion led to a discussion about Holy Communion, the Red Sea experience is more about the other sacrament of the church, the sacrament of Holy Baptism. And it builds on what is already a pretty impressive history in the book of Genesis of water playing a very important role in God's working and in his relationship with his people. This is spelled out in a little bit more detail on the lesson sheet, but just to kind of recap, at the beginning of creation, the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters. And then as the creation unfolds, God then separates the waters from the waters above in the sky, the waters below, and then gathers the waters of the heavens together, under the heavens together, rather, and calls them seas. The water is often seen in Genesis, also in Revelation, as this place of chaos, a place of fear, a place where people don't have a whole lot of control. And if you've ever been out in a little boat on a lake that's getting choppy and rough, you may have experienced some of those feelings yourself about water. It, on one hand, can be so refreshing, and on the other hand, absolutely terrifying. And then in Genesis, a little later on, God uses the flood to wash the world clean, if you will, after it had fallen into utter depravity, and uses the water to, in a sense, clean the earth up again, wash away the evil and the people who are evil, and save Noah and his family. Lots of that is in the, water's already played a significant role in the history of God's actions with people. And the Red Sea experience will continue to play a very significant role throughout the rest of the Old Testament. Joshua, who becomes the leader after Moses, and who actually leads the conquest of the Promised Land, at the end of his ministry in Joshua chapter 24, he talks about, he refers back very specifically to the Red Sea experience. We'll just read a couple verses here from Joshua chapter 24, where he reminds the people, "Then I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea. And the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. And when they cried out to the Lord, he put darkness between you and the Egyptians and made the sea come upon them and cover them. And your eyes saw what I did in Egypt, and you lived in the wilderness a long time." And then just a few verses later, he uses that Red Sea experience to call the people to faithfulness. He says, "Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." The Red Sea experience becomes the grounds by which Joshua calls the people to serve God and to be renewed and strengthened in their relationship with God. And then as the story of the Old Testament unfolds, there's even more references to the Red Sea. I put on your page, but I don't have a slide for it, Psalm 106, another place where the Old Testament writers, the psalmist in this case, refers back to that experience and how it was to shape the people. We'll just read this, and that'll be the closing for today, and then we'll pick it up with the New Testament part of this and our own baptismal crossing of the Red Sea next time. "Both we and our fathers have sinned. We committed iniquity, we have done wickedness. Our fathers, when they were in Egypt, did not consider the wondrous works. They did not remember the abundance of your steadfast love, but they rebelled at the Red Sea," which the people did. "Yet he saved them for his name's sake, that he might make known his mighty power. He rebuked the Red Sea, and it became dry, and he led them through the deep as through a desert. So he saved them from the hand of the foe and redeemed them from the power of the enemy. And the waters covered their adversaries. Not one of them was left. Then they believed his words. They sang his praise. But soon they forgot his works and did not wait for his counsel." The ongoing story of God's people. We'll see this next time as we move on from the Red Sea. They barely got themselves dried off, and from the splashing of the waters, they didn't get terribly wet going through. But they're barely out of the water, and they're griping and complaining about what else God has not apparently done for them. At any rate, we will leave it there. The praise singers need to set up some microphones and get some other things ready for the service. Let's close with a word of prayer, and we will pick this up next time and begin the journey down to Mount Sinai as well. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing your people through the Red Sea, bringing them through on dry ground, saving them, and that you also use water to save us in holy baptism, that you have brought us safely through, that we might be your people even as they were. We pray that you would guide and bless us always and keep us strong in our faith, that as your pilgrim people, we go forward trusting in your guidance every step of the way. We ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, thanks for your questions, comments, and we will get back at it a week from today.